In today's episode, we explore a shocking tale of manipulation, secrecy, and violence. A trusted therapist's affair with a teenager leads to an unexpected pregnancy and ends in a grisly murder that leaves a community reeling. Clarissa Bruce, just 19 years old, had already endured more challenges than most people face in a lifetime. Growing up in Hillsboro, Oregon, life had never been kind to her. Her early years were filled with difficulty, especially after her mother married a man who would later reveal himself to be abusive. From a young age, Clarissa endured physical abuse, turning her home into a place of fear instead of refuge. By high school, her life had begun to unravel. She battled severe depression, struggling to get out of bed and keep up with her friends and schoolwork. Over time, the weight of it all became too much, and she eventually dropped out, unable to envision a future where things could improve. By the time Clarissa turned 17, she felt utterly lost. It was then that her mother urged her to seek therapy. In a desperate attempt to find help, they turned to Dr. Ralph Langford, a therapist well known in Hillsboro for his work with teenagers and young adults. Dr. Langford had a strong reputation, which gave Clarissa a sense of hope that she might finally escape the painful cycle of her past. At first, therapy seemed to offer the relief she desperately needed. Dr. Langford provided the support and compassion that Clarissa had longed for, making her feel seen and heard for the first time in years. During their sessions, Clarissa began to feel safe enough to open up about her most painful experiences, sharing her past without fear of judgment. However, as time went on, something unsettling began to happen. Dr. Langford started introducing what he referred to as intimate healing techniques, shifting their sessions into a much more personal and inappropriate direction. He framed these interactions as opportunities for Clarissa to explore trust, intimacy, and her sense of self-worth. But in reality, they were a way for him to manipulate her into a secret sexual relationship. As the sessions progressed, Clarissa became increasingly confused and isolated, unsure of what was happening. She began to convince herself that this might be a distorted form of healing, not recognizing the manipulation for what it truly was. But deep down, Clarissa felt trapped and overwhelmed by uncertainty. Just days before her tragic death, she discovered that she was pregnant. The news hit her hard, leaving her in a state of shock and disbelief. Clarissa was unsure how Dr. Langford would react to the news or what it would mean for her future. She had recently started working at a local Jamba Juice to support herself, barely earning enough to cover her basic needs. The idea of becoming a mother at 19 was overwhelming, but the thought of having a family, something stable, and hers offered her a flicker of hope. Clarissa imagined what her life could be like if Dr. Langford offered her support, but when she finally told him about the pregnancy, he responded with cold indifference. His reaction left her feeling abandoned and more exposed than ever. In those final days, Clarissa held on to a fragile hope that somehow things might still work out. Clarissa was young and uncertain, but the pregnancy sparked a sense of possibility, a chance to dream of a different life. Tragically, she would never have the chance to see where those dreams could lead. Her future was taken from her far too soon. Her struggles and hopes were silenced forever. On the morning of June 4, 2015, residents of Hillsboro were stunned by a chilling discovery. At around 7:30 a.m., Dave Garcia, a delivery driver making his usual rounds, noticed something out of the ordinary in the alley behind a Jiffy Lube. The Jiffy Lube, located just off Main Street, was a spot Dave passed by every day, and the early morning hours were typically quiet. But on that day, something caught his eye, a motionless figure lying near some dumpsters. At first, Dave assumed it might be a homeless person resting or someone who had fallen and was hurt. But as he got closer, he quickly realized this was no ordinary situation. Dave quickly realized this was no accident. Fighting to keep his composure, he called 911, his voice trembling as he described the grim scene. The dispatcher tried to reassure him and keep him calm while they sent help, but it was clear the shock of witnessing such brutality had shaken him to the core. Within minutes, police arrived at the scene. Officers from the Hillsboro Police Department quickly secured the area and began searching the alley for any evidence. It didn't take long for them to identify the young woman as Clarissa Bruce, recognizing her from social media profiles and recent local news coverage. Clarissa was well known in the area, having worked at a local coffee shop, and her face was familiar to many in the community. As the police examined the crime scene, they noted several blunt force trauma injuries on her body, pointing to a brutal and violent attack. The severity of the injuries suggested that she had fought desperately to survive. Investigators quickly roped off the area and began gathering evidence, meticulously marking each piece. Detectives wearing gloves used tweezers to collect fibers, swabs to test for potential DNA, and cameras to document every detail of the scene. They were acutely aware that Hillsborough, a town known for its quiet, peaceful reputation, hadn't seen such a violent crime in years, making the case all the more disturbing for both the community and law enforcement. By midday, word had spread quickly through Hillsborough, and reporters from local stations like K2 and the Oregonian had arrived at the scene. The discovery of Clarissa's young body, with her life tragically cut short, left the tight-knit community in shock and searching for answers. The impact of such a violent crime shattered the town's sense of safety, and things would never feel the same again. The Hillsborough police acted swiftly, launching a careful investigation into the crime scene where 19-year-old Clarissa Bruce had been found. Detective Sarah Nolan and her team worked methodically, carefully marking evidence in the Jiffy Lube alley. The scene was unmistakably violent, scattered jewelry, blood spattered on the walls, and deep bruises across Clarissa's arms and face. Initially, police suspected she might have been sexually assaulted based on the condition of her clothes, but the autopsy later confirmed that this was not the case. The medical report revealed two key pieces of information that added complexity to the case. Clarissa was 2 months pregnant, and there were traces of both marijuana and alcohol in her system. These findings raised new questions and added layers of difficulty to the investigation. Hillsborough police began to suspect that Clarissa's troubled personal life may have played a role in her tragic end. She had endured years of hardship, particularly due to her stepfather, a man known for his violent outbursts and alleged abuse. Detective Nolan noted that Clarissa had previously reported incidents of physical abuse to authorities, but those cases were closed due to insufficient evidence. This history of trauma added a troubling layer to the investigation. Given her troubled history, Clarissa's family, particularly her stepfather, quickly became a focus of suspicion. However, this theory was quickly ruled out when police confirmed that Clarissa's mother and stepfather were hundreds of miles away at the time of her death. Phone and transaction records revealed that the couple had been on a pre-planned family vacation to Disneyland in Anaheim, California, far from Hillsborough, when the tragedy occurred. Given her troubled history, Clarissa's family, particularly her stepfather, quickly became a focus of suspicion. However, this theory was quickly ruled out when police confirmed that Clarissa's mother and stepfather were hundreds of miles away at the time of her death. Phone and transaction records revealed that the couple had been on a pre-planned family vacation to Disneyland in Anaheim, California, far from Hillsborough, when the tragedy occurred. Detectives remained troubled by the circumstances surrounding Clarissa's pregnancy. In interviews with her friends and co-workers at the local Jamba Juice, where she worked, police learned that Clarissa had recently confided in a few people about a secret relationship. However, she had been cautious, revealing only vague details. She mentioned that the father of her unborn child was older and someone outside her immediate social circle, but she hadn't shared much more. This raised new questions about who might have been involved in her life and in her death. The presence of substances in Clarissa's system led detectives to consider the possibility that she may have been involved with someone who either enabled or shared her struggles with substance use. They began to investigate her social life more thoroughly, hoping to identify individuals who had been in contact with her in the weeks leading up to her death. With little physical evidence left at the scene beyond blood splatter and scattered belongings, Detective Nolan and her team focused on Clarissa's personal connections, each new lead bringing them one step closer to uncovering the truth. Dr. Ralph Langford, 52, was a well-respected therapist in Hillsborough, Oregon, known for his commitment to the mental health of young people. Over the years, he had built a strong reputation as a compassionate and effective counselor, especially for troubled teens and young adults. He was praised for his ability to connect with clients who struggled in more traditional therapy settings. Dr. Langford had received several accolades for his work, including an Outstanding Service Award from the Hillsborough Mental Health Alliance in 2012 and a Community Champion Award in 2014. Behind his respected facade, however, Dr. Langford harbored a much darker side. Police discovered that he had crossed professional boundaries with Clarissa, turning their therapy sessions into something far from ethical. Under the guise of intimate healing techniques, which were, in fact, sexual acts, he had engaged in a sexual relationship with the 19-year-old. exploiting his position of trust in a deeply manipulative and harmful way. He presented these encounters as vital steps in Clarissa's emotional recovery, preying on her vulnerabilities and convincing her that what he called intimate healing was essential for overcoming her trauma. Langford assured Clarissa that their relationship was not only necessary for her progress but also a unique and special bond. This manipulation led Clarissa to believe she needed his help, making her dependent on their sessions and leaving her in an incredibly vulnerable position. When police brought Langford in for questioning, he appeared calm and composed, using his controlled demeanor to try to maintain authority over the situation. He confidently explained that his methods were unconventional but aimed at building trust with his patients. However, when detectives confronted him with the details of his physical relationship with Clarissa, his calm demeanor began to falter. The officers asked direct, pointed questions about the intimate healing techniques he claimed to use, pressing him on the ethics of engaging in a sexual relationship with a young, vulnerable patient. As the questioning grew more intense, Langford's composure started to crack, revealing the extent of his manipulation. Langford became visibly uneasy, his usual calm unraveling as the gravity of the situation sank in. He initially denied any wrongdoing, claiming their relationship was consensual and that he believed it was in Clarissa's best interest. However, investigators weren't swayed by his explanations. They saw through his defense, recognizing the manipulation and abuse of his professional position. The detectives presented him with text messages he had sent to Clarissa, messages that were clearly inappropriate and explicitly romantic. As they pressed further, Langford's responses grew more defensive. He claimed that his work had been misunderstood, insisting that he had only acted as a guide to help Clarissa with her recovery, trying to downplay the seriousness of the situation and maintain that his intentions were never malicious. However, the evidence told a different story. Detectives observed Langford's shift from calm and collected to visibly anxious and defensive as they pointed out the power imbalance in his relationship with Clarissa. The officers pressed him on the professional and legal violations that had occurred, emphasizing the profound harm he had caused to a young woman already burdened with trauma. With each question, Langford's attempts to justify his actions became less convincing as the weight of the evidence mounted against him. Langford, who had spent years building a career based on his credibility, now found himself facing the very real possibility that his actions would soon be fully exposed. Meanwhile, his wife, Elise Chan Langford, 29, was known in Hillsborough as a sharp and determined businesswoman who ran a successful chain of nail salons in the Portland area. But above all, Elise was fiercely loyal to her husband, a loyalty that went so far as to protect his reputation at any cost, even if it meant turning a blind eye to the truth. Their relationship began nearly a decade ago when Elise was a struggling college student, reeling from the devastating loss of her father to suicide. In search of help, she turned to Dr. Langford, and he quickly became more than just her therapist. The boundaries of their professional relationship blurred, eventually evolving into something sexual. Before long, Elise found herself in love with the man who had once been her counselor, and their connection shifted from therapy to a complex, secretive bond. Elise clung to the belief that Dr. Langford had saved her from a dark and painful time, feeling deeply indebted to him. Despite the complex and questionable start to their relationship, she had always believed she was Ralph's one true partner. But over the years, cracks began to appear in her faith in him, as she started to see sides of him that challenged the idealized image she had once held. Elise couldn't ignore the red flags that suggested Ralph might be crossing sexual boundaries with other clients, just as he had with her. Her suspicions grew into a deep paranoia, making her increasingly anxious about the possibility that Ralph was involved with young patients inappropriately. This fear gnawed at her, leaving her on edge and desperate to uncover the truth, whether to confirm her worst fears or prove them wrong. Her marriage had become a constant cycle of worry and resentment, as her blind loyalty to Ralph clashed with growing feelings of betrayal. When the police arrived to question Elise, she had no idea how close her worst fears had come to reality. Detectives confronted her with evidence linking Ralph to 19-year-old Clarissa Bruce, showing her messages and call records between the two, evidence that shattered any illusion she had about her husband's innocence. At first, Elise managed to keep her composure, clinging to the hope that it was all just a misunderstanding. But as the evidence mounted texts, call logs, and the damning details of Ralph's involvement with Clarissa, her calm facade began to crack. The crushing realization that Ralph had taken advantage of Clarissa, just as he had once taken advantage of her, hit her with overwhelming force. The betrayal she had once ignored now felt like an undeniable truth, and the weight of it was unbearable. Detectives pressed Elise for details, asking if she had ever witnessed Ralph behaving inappropriately with other clients, or if she had any reason to believe he was involved with Clarissa in particular. Elise denied knowing anything about Clarissa, but she admitted that she had always felt uneasy about Ralph's relationships with his clients. As she spoke, her body language grew tense, and her voice trembled with a mix of fear and anger. The questions seemed to chip away at the walls she had built around herself, forcing her to confront the truth she had long tried to ignore. Elise, who had spent years convincing herself of Ralph's unwavering dedication to their marriage, was now forced to face the painful reality that he might have been lying to her all along. In those tense moments, her loyalty to him began to fracture as she recognized that her deepest fears had been justified. The trust she had once placed in him crumbled, leaving her feeling betrayed and hollowed out by the very man she had once believed in. Elise struggled to comprehend the full extent of Ralph's betrayal. But as she grappled with the emotional fallout, a chilling question lingered: was it enough for him to kill? As police delved deeper into the investigation, a shocking twist emerged, one that would change the course of the case entirely. Initially, investigators had focused on Dr. Ralph Langford as the prime suspect in Clarissa Bruce's death, given his inappropriate relationship with her. However, new evidence began to point in an entirely unexpected direction. As detectives examined Elise Chan Langford's digital records more closely, they uncovered a series of messages that hinted at something far more sinister. Elise, who had long remained steadfast in her loyalty to Ralph, appeared to have known about his relationship with Clarissa. In fact, the messages revealed that she had confronted Clarissa about it. This new revelation completely shifted the direction of the investigation, suggesting that Elise may have been more involved in the events leading up to Clarissa's death than initially believed. The discovery of these messages painted a drastically different picture of the case, raising unsettling questions about Elise's role in the tragedy. The texts revealed a heated exchange in which Elise warned Clarissa to stay away from Ralph. Some of her words conveyed a deep and bitter resentment toward the young woman, calling her vile names and accusing her of ruining families. The harshness of the messages suggested that Elise had more than just a passing knowledge of the affair. She appeared to be consumed by anger and jealousy. With this new evidence, investigators began to suspect that Elise might have played a much larger role in the events surrounding Clarissa's death than anyone had initially realized. This new evidence forced detectives to reevaluate Elise's role in the case, considering her as a potential suspect rather than just a concerned wife. The texts and her apparent rage suggested that jealousy, anger, and betrayal might have driven Elise to take drastic action against Clarissa. Friends of Elise began to come forward, describing her as increasingly tense and unsettled in the days leading up to Clarissa's death. Some even noted her erratic behavior, raising suspicions that her emotional turmoil had reached a breaking point, potentially leading to violent consequences. As investigators began to piece together a timeline, they discovered that Elise had access to Clarissa's whereabouts and could have easily planned to confront her alone. This new development shifted the focus of the investigation from Ralph to Elise, raising the possibility that her jealousy and betrayal had driven her to take matters into her own hands. The case, once seen as a straightforward investigation into a therapist's unethical behavior, had now evolved into a tangled web of deceit. Elise's hidden motivations added a chilling new layer to the mystery, leaving detectives to wonder if her emotional turmoil had led her to commit a far more sinister act than anyone had initially suspected. As the investigation progressed, police found themselves grappling with more questions than answers. They intensified their search for additional evidence, delving deeper into Elise's activities and reaching out to those close to her for insight. The media quickly caught wind of the unfolding twist, and local news stations, as well as the Oregonian newspaper, began running stories that speculated on the case's outcome. The growing media frenzy only added to the pressure on law enforcement, as the small town of Hillsborough watched with bated breath to see where the investigation would lead and whether the shocking truth about Elise's involvement would eventually come to light. As police delved further into Clarissa's life and relationships, they uncovered another potential suspect: Kyle Langford, Ralph's 17-year-old nephew. Interviews with Clarissa's friends and classmates revealed unsettling details that suggested Kyle had developed an unhealthy obsession with her. Known for his unpredictable temper and difficulty fitting in, Kyle had always been seen as a bit of an outsider. His behavior toward Clarissa had raised red flags. He had reportedly become fixated on her, and some of her friends mentioned feeling uneasy about his attention. This new information introduced a disturbing new angle to the investigation, complicating the search for Clarissa's killer even further. As police delved further into Clarissa's life and relationships, they uncovered another potential suspect, Kyle Langford, Ralph's 17-year-old nephew. Interviews with Clarissa's friends and classmates revealed unsettling details that suggested Kyle had developed an unhealthy obsession with her. Known for his unpredictable temper and difficulty fitting in, Kyle had always been seen as a bit of an outsider. His behavior toward Clarissa had raised red flags. He had reportedly become fixated on her, and some of her friends mentioned feeling uneasy about his attention. This new information introduced a disturbing new angle to the investigation, complicating the search for Clarissa's killer even further. Kyle's obsession with Clarissa grew more apparent through a series of late-night messages he sent her, which alternated between expressions of admiration and bursts of anger when she didn't reply quickly enough. His texts were filled with confessions of deep affection, suggesting he believed they shared a unique, almost destined bond. The tone of his messages became increasingly possessive, and jealousy seeped through when he learned of her secret relationship with his uncle, Ralph. Kyle's anger and frustration were clear, and some of his messages even implied that he felt betrayed by Clarissa's involvement with someone he looked up to. This mounting tension in their communication painted a troubling picture of Kyle's state of mind leading up to Clarissa's death. Friends reported that Kyle seemed increasingly withdrawn and sullen after hearing rumors about Clarissa's involvement with Ralph. He became visibly angry and confused, unable to understand why she would choose someone else over him. His frustration deepened, and he started spending more time alone, obsessively tracking Clarissa's social media accounts. He would show up at places she frequented, local coffee shops, stores, and other spots around Hillsborough, seemingly keeping tabs on her movements. When police finally confronted Kyle, his discomfort was immediate and evident. His body language was stiff, and he seemed reluctant to speak, clearly aware that his obsession with Clarissa was coming under scrutiny. Detectives confronted Kyle with a series of messages he had sent to Clarissa, pressing him on why he was so angry and possessive. Initially, Kyle tried to downplay his behavior, nervously insisting that he simply cared about her and wanted to make sure she was okay. But as the questioning continued, his demeanor shifted. He became more defensive, claiming he didn't understand why everyone was making such a big deal about his relationship with Clarissa. His agitation grew, and he appeared increasingly uncomfortable with the attention his behavior was receiving. Despite his attempts to brush off the questions, the detectives were focused on the disturbing pattern of obsession and possessiveness that seemed to have escalated in the days leading up to Clarissa's death. Kyle's discomfort intensified when detectives asked about his whereabouts on the night of Clarissa's death. His answers became increasingly evasive, his tone fluctuating between frustration and fear as he claimed he had been nowhere near the scene. Despite his denials, the detectives couldn't overlook the disturbing intensity of Kyle's obsession with Clarissa. Kyle's behavior followed a troubling pattern, one that indicated a young man grappling with feelings of rejection and betrayal by the girl he had once idolized. His social media accounts provided further insight, filled with posts and photos of Clarissa, often accompanied by desperate and longing captions. While the police weren't yet ready to make an arrest, they had marked Kyle as a person of interest, aware that his intense feelings for Clarissa could have escalated into something far more sinister. As new evidence continued to surface and the list of potential suspects grew, the investigation shifted focus to piecing together the final clues that would uncover the truth behind Clarissa's tragic death. As the case neared its resolution, investigators arrived at one chilling conclusion: Dr. Ralph Langford, Clarissa's therapist and secret lover, was responsible for her death. According to police reports, when Dr. Langford learned of Clarissa's pregnancy, his desperation grew. During a private therapy session, he allegedly pressured her to terminate the pregnancy, claiming that having a child would ruin both of their lives. Despite his insistence, Clarissa stood firm, expressing her desire to keep the baby and raise it on her own. Faced with rejection, Langford reportedly felt cornered. Police theorized that, in a desperate attempt to protect his reputation and avoid the potential legal fallout, he took drastic action. On June 3, 2015, investigators believed that Langford lured Clarissa to a secluded area under the pretense of helping her clear her mind. Accounts suggest that, in the face of mounting pressure, he masked his growing rage and guilt, convincing himself that this was the only way to preserve everything he had worked so hard to build. The breakthrough in the case came when police uncovered a series of text messages between Langford and Clarissa, revealing his frantic attempts to keep their affair a secret. Surveillance footage later confirmed his presence near the crime scene, with his car parked nearby on the night of her death. When officers arrived to arrest Dr. Langford at his home, he maintained a calm facade, initially denying any involvement in her death. However, the mounting evidence left little room for him to escape the truth. As the investigators presented their findings, his calm exterior began to falter. He appeared shaken, giving unclear responses that hinted at his guilt. At the same time, his wife, Clarissa Langford, was deeply affected by the revelation. Clarissa Langford, who had always defended her husband's name, was crushed and ashamed by his behavior. The same loyalty that had once bound her to him now felt like a betrayal, leaving her to grapple with the harsh truth. With the evidence mounting, Dr. Langford was arrested for the murder of Clarissa, leaving both the community in disbelief and his family torn apart. The investigation into Clarissa's tragic death uncovered some answers, but it also left a lasting impact on everyone involved. Dr. Ralph Langford's trial began in March 2016, drawing widespread media attention. The courtroom was filled with family, friends, and reporters, all anxious to learn more about the shocking case. Prosecutor Sarah Jenkins and defense attorney Malloy Henson went head-to-head, each presenting their case to the jury. Jenkins portrayed Langford as a manipulative predator who exploited his trusted position, while Henson countered that the evidence was circumstantial and raised doubts about the credibility of the police investigation. As the trial progressed, more evidence came to light against Dr. Langford, including text messages and surveillance footage. It appeared undeniable that Dr. Langford had both the motive and the opportunity to kill Clarissa. But just when the prosecution thought they had a solid case, something completely unexpected occurred. In a tense moment during the trial, Elise Langford, Ralph's wife, abruptly stood up and rushed toward the microphone in the courtroom. Her voice echoed through the courtroom as she declared, "I'm the real killer." A stunned silence followed, as everyone absorbed her shocking confession. Elise went on to explain that she had killed Clarissa after discovering her husband in a compromising situation with the young woman. The courtroom was thrown into chaos by Elise's unexpected confession, but law enforcement and the prosecution quickly expressed doubts. They suspected that her admission was a desperate effort to protect her husband from a long prison sentence, rather than the truth. There was no evidence connecting Elise to the crime, and her account clashed with the overwhelming evidence against Dr. Langford. The judge swiftly called for order, and Elise was escorted from the courtroom, her emotional outburst leaving a tense, unsettling air. The trial continued, and after several days of deliberation, the jury finally returned with a verdict. Dr. Ralph Langford was convicted of second-degree murder, and the sentencing followed soon after, resulting in a lengthy prison term. He sat motionless, his face showing no emotion, though those who knew him noticed a brief flash of disbelief in his eyes. The man who had once been a respected figure in the community was now a convicted murderer. For Elise, the verdict brought mixed emotions. While she saw her husband finally held accountable, she was left with a deep sense of loss and betrayal. The shocking events of the trial, along with her own desperate outburst, left Elise with more questions than answers. In the years after Dr. Ralph Langford's trial, the lives of everyone involved took unexpected turns. Langford was sentenced to 25 years to life for Clarissa's murder and spent his days in a maximum security prison.